Hello everyone, welcome to this week's Life on the Hulls. Huge week here on the hulls. Zach and I got our engines running and it was so bloody exciting. You cannot imagine what that felt like to have two brand new Yanmar 4JH57 shaft drive motors ticking over and running like they should. There was weeks of work in the engine rooms to get them plumbed in, to get all the fuel lines right, and to get our water running through the engines as well. There's a lot of routing and everything, so I'm going to cover that a lot later on, but I just had to let you know it was so exciting, and we put it up on Instagram, got a massive result. So if you're ever looking for more up-to-date information, you can certainly go to Patreon or to Instagram or Facebook, our Facebook site Life on the Hulls, and Instagram, and you'll see it all there. Now this week I'm going to basically get into some major projects. We're getting into a weather cowling for the side of our deck, and very important piece that we're actually going to add. We sort of toot and froed as to whether or not to do it. That's in this week's episode and lots more. So thanks for joining me. Let's get into it. I've got to do some chain plate reinforcement on the side of the hull, and I'll actually determine where the chain plates were from the rigging plan we got when we bought the mould. But very important that I use a lot of carbon, and what I've chosen to do, I've actually got 600 gram unis, carbon unis, that I'm actually laminating into the rear robe here, which is where these chain plates are going to touch down. They're going to be a round chain plate which will take the lower diagonals and the cap shroud, and they have been in here. So what I've just done is laminated that lot into this cupboard here to determine the chain plate will actually be a round chain plate actually centered in the middle of this reinforcement that I have here. Now I have actually avoided putting this cupboard face in purely because I needed to get this in before I put the cupboard face in. I just realised I could have put the cupboard face in 2 years ago and wouldn't have to worry about it. But yeah, I've done that is vinyl ester and carbon uni, 600 grain carbon with one layer of 600 double bias glass over the top of it, just to reinforce it into the sides of the cupboard. Very importantly, by doing that I've actually spread the load quite considerably throughout this robe. I couldn't actually attach it to the actual bulkhead because this isn't a structural bulkhead, however this one is, and this one here actually engages into the back deck of the boat here, so it's all a box section, and I think it'll be more than strong enough for the chain plate required. One's over here in this side, and we have our carbon unis here. This is a very heavy weave. It's a particularly good unidirectional that has obviously got incredible strength in the 0 and 90 degree format. This particular chain plate's actually in here. It's in this robe here, and it's attached to this bulkhead here. So once again, it's a box section. We're actually 30 centimeters forward of the cabin top, and the cabin top roof, the wall is actually here, 30 centimeters forward, so it's in line with this major structural component here, and obviously box sectioned in to a very serious sort of geometry of structure here. So it will go right there where that X is there, and it'll be engaged into this, engaged into the shelf here, and spread as far as I can get inside this cabinet. And once again, it's only a disc around about 15 centimeters round with 6 countersunk bolts. Why use countersunk? I don't want to use a hex head bolt because that will potentially catch on lines, halyards or whatever, and also they tend to break off. If you use countersunk, you can actually seal them as they come in from the outside, so there'll be a subsequent plate on the inside, and I'll be a stainless plate, and that will actually bond to the outside one and form a very strong unit. We'll probably vacuum this onto the wall, but I don't think it's necessary here. I was worried about it actually not adhering to the wall, but it's not going to be a problem. It's not really that heavy. It's just that we got this carbon is really, the stiffness of the carbon is not going to allow for any movement of that chain plate. Now, the key to this chain plate is to spread the loads in as many directions as possible, including down. And what I'm doing is I'm going from the top down. I'm also going into this bulkhead, into this shelf, into the following bulkhead as well, trying to spread these loads because the loads are pulling forward, which is pulling all of this structure forward as well as wanting to lift the hull. So the more we can box in a chain plate, the better. And carbon uni should be more than enough, given there's already about 1 centimetre of solid glass. You can see the carbon in here. I've got to pleat it to get it into here, but I'm spreading the load all across this whole member here, and it gets wider as I laminate out. The next one will go out to here, next one will go out to here. The more spread I can get, the better, and transfer that load throughout this entire region here. So you now see why I didn't want to put this wardrobe face in, because that was a good hour and a half of solid laminating. There's the carbon in there, spread all over that area there, and now I've got a really good basis for a chain plate. Better check and see if there's any work being done here. All right. Oh, you are such a legend doing this, you know. Janet is just hitting all the big, difficult tasks. She's tabbing inside the wardrobes, and you're just being awesome at it, honey. Sounds like I forgot to put the horse to bed. Yeah. It was hilarious. Okay. Doing a great job, Jen.
Thanks,
Good to see one more wardrobe being done. Yeah. Righto, there's been a lot going on down in here, including rudder bearing install. So we're at the point where we need to put in our hydraulic piston mount, and it's going to be a little bit complicated. Right, so I've come up with this idea here. This plinth or support will sit over the top of the rudder, so it'll actually be down a little lower and engaging with this bulkhead, engaging with this wall. There'll be a couple of gussets underneath here to support the rudder piston, which will sit here and come in at an angle but remain at 90 degrees to the tiller itself. It doesn't really matter whether this is dead straight in line with the rudder off center or here. It depends on how I engage that rudder into the rudder shaft into this. Will depend on how that all mounts up. But I think if I mount the piston there where that mark is there, and it comes in there, that'll give me 35 degrees there, center, 35 degrees there, and that way this entire thing operates over the top of this support table that I've made here, this shelf, and this will be made out of 30mm foam, and then I'm going to laminate probably 3 or 4 layers of glass on it, and then it will be supported by numerous gussets underneath to make it nice and strong, be engaged in with the wall, in with the bulkhead, and that is more than enough for the strength that I need for this particular system. Alright, here's my port and starboard support shelves. They're pretty much identical, a little bit of a variance, but that's not really a big deal. I'm just going to cut them on the bandsaw and then I can get them laminated up. Now, a helm station over here basically is going to have another roof on it, a bit like a pod roof like you'd find, say, a Lightwave 45. So that's how I'm going to deal with the weather and sail track to almost enclose that entire region here once I get the seat and everything in place. But on the starboard side, I've got a bit of a problem. the water is going to run straight along and run straight into the cockpit. And this area here, over on the corner here, is a bit of a problem. Now I can actually deal with it with a clear eyes and glass type arrangement on sail tracks, or I actually have a two-piece mold that came with all the molds. And I wasn't ever sure whether I was going to use it or not. And Janet and I had the discussion, like, it's going to be a lot of work to do it. Not so much to make it, but to fabricate it and make it look like it actually belonged in a boat. All right, so we're making a very simple two-faced part here, and we've obviously got the molds. Now, there's no chance of being able to vacuum these easily without actually making up a base. So what we're doing is we're just preparing these molds. They're a few years since they've seen any polish or any release wax, so Janet's just giving this a good buff and a good polish, as we'll show on the video here. And then we're down to our last coat of TR release wax on both faces. This is a two-piece double-sided mold, and we're going to actually make two separate parts and then just glue them together. That's a pretty simple fix for a large part on the side of this boat. Now, something very important to realise is that when you're polishing a mold, and you want to later on use this table to lay up laminates or to lay up spray gel, is it very important that you put down some sort of a tarp to catch any of the residue of the polish. You don't want the polish contaminating your work surface. This black plastic is a clean surface that we know we can laminate straight onto, and basically we don't want anything that's going to affect that. So what we've done, put a tarp down, done all the polishing on the tarp, we'll remove the tarp, and then we can go back to the black plastic to use as our surface. Cross-contamination is a big issue here because we don't want any delamination of our substrate. So we're going to use spray white gel coat here, and we're using a very simple HVLP gun, high volume, low pressure gun. Now this actually has a 2.5 millimeter nozzle. Very important you use something at least 2.5 millimeter or you're not going to get the spray out. And don't use brush gel. So important that you specify when you order it that it is actually spray gel coat. What's often not talked about is the preparation of the spray gun. I make sure that every single time I spray up, I open up the nozzle, I remove the front face and make sure there's no particles in there from the thread of the bottle. Often, invariably, you'll get a thread of gel coat that's actually been part of this thread will actually fall into the barrel of the gun or into the gravity feed and could easily choke your delivery. And then when you start to spray, obviously it's going to block the nozzle and it's going to come out as a spurt, or even worse still, block it entirely, and then you're going to end up with obviously no delivery. I also make sure that I have my pressure set right, have this at around about 60 psi. As far as the settings go, I have the fan completely open, and I have this pressure nozzle for the needle, or for the nozzle, actually backed right out and then slightly in, and then this one here on the bottom here, my air delivery, I just make sure that I have enough pressure in there. And we're looking for wall of the fan where it's actually going to hit the surface of the material I'm spraying, or the mold, so you can hear it right there. So we're going to about a 30 centimeter delivery of the fan. And I have this set every single time at the same setting so that I know every single time it's going to be consistent. How you going with it? Looking good, way. Done one. Have you done my piece yet or not? No. Oh, come on, what have you been doing? I know, it's great. Oh, well done. Okay, so these are our side blinkers for the side of our hardtop, 2-piece mould, and so that means we get a nice glossy surface on both sides. We're going to join this together potentially tomorrow once Janet's finished laminating. Doing a great job. Is that the second layer on that one?
Yeah.
Oh, well done. Beautiful.
I'm just trying to make sure these are the carpet rather than...
Yeah, no, that's great. It doesn't really matter as long as we get good thickness. We're going to be aiming for about probably about 6mm of glass on this. So we've got layer 300, 2 layers of 600 on this. So that's your last layer there. Righto, next morning, just been for a paddle and a swim with Janet. Ooh, a bit chilly. It's 30 degrees, but the water's only about 14, so pretty cool this morning. It was bloody cold. I went and serviced our mooring and we've got a new mooring, and I had to go down and clean all the lines and get all the barnacles and crap off the ropes. So it's a bit late. I've come in about midday today, which is pretty pathetic. But yesterday, Janet laid up these. These are my rudder bearing piston shelves. On our port side we have our helm station, and we didn't need the blinker here. It's already got a coaming that is going to deflect some of the water away. Now I'm going to have to build a coaming to go on top of this particular piece here once it's fitted in place, and that will allow for water as it's coming along the side of the boat to flick away rather than flick into the cockpit. That's sort of one of my pet hates, is water going into the cockpit when we're moving along, so I'm trying to avoid that. Although it is an outdoor area, you'd expect a cockpit to get wet. You don't want any unnecessary water, especially wave splash and stuff like that, just landing in there inadvertently. If you can deal with it by putting in a small coaming and a lip to get it away, or a drain, do it. It makes a massive difference to your comfort when you're underway. So I'm going to demold it and just make sure it's okay before I go gluing it back together. It sort of has to be, really, because it was only gel coat and a couple of layers of glass. But I just want to make sure that it does actually fit the boat first. I did actually do a temporary test, but it's going to be pretty simple to demold. I've just got the separating line here, and we'll pull it off the mould, and it's reasonably thick already. It's probably 3 or 4 mil. Look how easy that came off. I mean, that was just so simple. So having that demolded, I'm just going to go down. I'm going to trim the edges of it because I want to make sure that it actually fits on the boat correctly, make sure I don't have to make any major modifications to it. I'll leave this one as is because the cloth is actually tapering away from it. It's not going to interfere with the gluing, but this here could. The way that this is actually laid up, it actually could interfere with the way I clamp it together. So this part was designed for this cat, but there was no doubt about its fitment. But to be able to determine where it needed trimming, a dry fit was in order, just to satisfy my curiosity. It was actually a very easy fitment, and ultimately will be fed into the card top and the back of the cabin face. Okay, so we've demolded the outside of the exterior of it. We have the interior of it here. I'm leaving it on the mould so I can hold the form to a true shape. I don't want to go demolding it and then trying to replicate that shape. I'm better off to leave it on the mould. I've actually propped it up here so it's nice and solid. Now what we're going to do, we're going to actually use a 2mm Soric core mat here. And this core mat is actually a Q-cell filled cloth. It's an impregnated cloth which gives bulk but no sort of structural benefit, but gives a good thickness. So I can add 2mm of substrate thickness to this particular thing, and then what I'm going to do once that's laminated onto there, I'm going to put excess resin on, put this part on top of it, clamp it in place, and then basically that will complete the job. Hey, this is a very unique product in that it's lined on both sides. The other option is you make the outside and then you just simply fair and paint the inside, but because I had a 2-piece mold on, I might be able to cut out a bit of work here and get to a quicker result, and certainly this is the way to do it. Both sides been prepped, sanded. I've added a layer of core mat. I just put one more layer, 300 CSM on there, just to be able to squish this thing together to make it all one piece. I've already got a probably 3mm face on each side, plus the core mats. It doesn't need to be any bigger than that. Don't want to add too much weight. So it's simply a matter of placing this in place, getting it exactly in place, and make sure that it's aligned. and then I'll leave that for about 2 hours and come back and it's done. I can trim it, fit it. There's never enough clamps. So that's going to be around about 1 centimetre thick when that comes off the mould late this afternoon, and basically I can start to prepare the boat to fit this part, and it's going to be pretty amazing difference to the shelter it's going to provide. Even though it's only very small, the angle of entry and where it actually sits on the boat will actually provide a bit of aerodynamics and get that water splashing off the side of the boat rather than into the cockpit. Just taking the clamps off. This is now joined. I did this about 6 hours ago. It's been a pretty big day, but yeah, that's now basically together. I'll just pull it off the mould and we'll have a look at the other side. It's that simple. And now we have a reasonably lightweight monocoque structure, all one piece. That's going to just look amazing. And what I'll do tomorrow morning, I'll let that set up overnight. I'll just leave it to fully cure through the night, come back, trim it in, and then I'll take it up onto the boat and we'll start to fit it tomorrow.